everyone, welcome back to my channel. For those of you that are new here, my name is Gem, and on this channel we look at everything from true crime to the paranormal. Sometimes we sprinkle in a little bit of spirituality as well, and I'm so happy that you clicked on this video. Now today we are going to be looking at the meaning behind the seemingly innocent phrase of Sweet Fanny Adams. Now I remember personally as a child that my parents used this saying, my grandparents used this saying, and to be completely honest, I just assumed that the name Fanny Adams was a generic name, not necessarily any person in particular, that kind of fit with the Victorian-ish kind of era. You probably wouldn't believe that the meaning behind it comes from the particularly gruesome murder of an innocent 8-year-old girl. So let's take a look at that case and how that became the popular phrase. Fanny Adams was born on the 30th of April 1859 in the small village of Alton, Hampshire in England. Her parents were George and Harriet, and together they lived on Tanhouse Lane with Fanny's older sister Ellen, her two older brothers George and Walter, her two younger sisters Lizzie and Lily, and George and Harriet also went on to have a 7th child, Minnie, but sadly Fanny would never ever get to meet her youngest sister. Alton in general was known as an area for its large production of hops. Now, hops are used for beer production, and this was great for the local economy because companies were coming from far and wide to build new breweries, which in turn gave employment opportunities for the local people, both with the production of the beer, the delivery, and also the farmers in the hop fields. So Tanhouse Lane was a quiet little back street. It backed onto a field that was known locally as Flood Meadow and was surrounded by the River Wey. This field then led onto one of the many local hop fields. Now, being surrounded by so many fields, it seems natural that children, of the mid-1800s who didn't have parks on every corner or TVs and game consoles to keep themselves entertained, would seek out places like empty fields to run around in and to play. And Alton was not known for its high crime rate. In fact, many of the villagers lived there didn't have a living memory of any murders or abductions or any really serious crimes. So when the children would go and play in this local field, the adults felt safe and secure in the knowledge that their children would be fine. So when, just after lunchtime on the 24th of August 1867, Fanny, who was aged 8 at the time, asked her mother Harriet if she, her younger sister Lizzie, and her 8-year-old best friend Minnie Warner, who happened to live 2 doors away, could go and play in Flood Meadow, her mother agreed happily. Her mum was probably just happy to get the kids out from under her feet. It was August, it was a fine and sunny day. Fanny was known as a lively, happy little girl, though she was tall for her age and could have appeared much older than her young 8 years. She was known to be intelligent and friendly and would happily talk to people that she would meet in the streets. As the 3 young girls skipped along Tanhouse Lane, making their way toward Flood Meadow, they came across a finely dressed and seemingly respectable man. This man was 29-year-old Frederick Baker. Now, Baker had lived in Alton for around 12 months. He'd moved there from Guildford after he was offered a position as a solicitor's clerk. He began his employment working for the local solicitor, Mr. Clemens, in his offices on the High Street. On that day, he was dressed in a dark coloured tailcoat, some lighter coloured trousers, and was wearing a top hat. The girls had no reason to fear Baker. They'd seen him regularly as they all attended the same church, although they had never actually spoken with him. Baker stopped the girls and engaged in conversation with them. He went and he picked blackberries for the girls to eat. Then he stood and he watched them playing and running up and down a street known locally as the Hollow. Eventually, he offered Minnie and Lizzie 3 halfpence to go and get themselves some sweets. He offered Fanny a halfpenny for herself if she would accompany him to the neighbouring village of Sheldon. Fanny took the money but refused to go with Baker. Not long after, Minnie and Lizzie were complaining of being bored and tired. They're very, very young, remember, and had decided that they were going to go home. Baker tried desperately to convince Fanny to accompany him, and still she refused. Eventually, he tired of trying to persuade her, realised that he was far bigger than she was, and simply picked her up and carried her towards the hop field. Minnie and Lizzie ran back to Townhouse Lane and told Minnie's mum, Martha Warner, what had just happened. Martha made a decision that probably haunted her until the day she died. She didn't believe the girls. She thought that they were making up a story, and so she sent them on their way. Remember, these girls are 8 and about 5 years old. They didn't have the capacity to be able to think about the consequences of what they just witnessed. Nor did they understand the severity of the situation. They couldn't possibly have comprehended the brutality that Fanny was about to encounter. So the girls go back outside and they continue to play. Several hours later, at around 5 p.m, Minnie and Lizzie return home. On their way, they bump into a neighbour of theirs named Mrs. Gardner. Now, Mrs. Gardner was very well aware that the girls were always with Fanny. The three of them were always playing together, and so she inquired, where was Fanny today? The girls relayed the story that Baker had picked Fanny up and taken her into the hop field. Mrs. Gardner was immediately alarmed by this and ran to tell Fanny's mother, Harriet. The two women went marching over to Flood Meadow, where who should they come across but Baker himself. They immediately begin to question him about Fanny's whereabouts. He admits that yes, he gave the girls some money, but he was so generous and so kind that he did it all the time for the local children, because he was just such a lovely man. He said that he had last seen Fanny at the gate to Flood Meadow, and there was nothing more to it. Now, whatever he said to those women, obviously we'll never know word for word, but whatever he said was bloody convincing, because those women went home and believed that Fanny was playing safely. A couple more hours pass, and at 7 p.m, Harriet begins to get super worried that Fanny had still not returned home, and so she gathers some of the neighbours and they all go out to search for the missing 8-year-old girl. At around the same time, local man Thomas Gates had finished his work for the day and was taking a shortcut through the hop field back to his house. He was completely unaware of Fanny's disappearance. As he passed through the field, he came across an inconceivably gruesome sight. Resting on top of 2 hop poles was the severed and mutilated head of a child. Of course, that child was Fanny Adams. Now, the brutality that was inflicted on this poor little girl is some of the worst that I have ever read about. And you know, some of you will already know that I studied law at university, so reading about particularly horrendous crimes is not something that is new to me, but I have to say that this one, I had to put things down and back away because it's grim reading. As well as her head being severed, Fanny's attacker had removed one of her ears. He made an incision from the ear all the way down to the corner of her mouth. Her arms and legs had also been removed from her torso. Her arm had been severed at the elbow joint. Her left leg had been sliced at the hip joint and was hanging off. Her right foot had also been torn from the ankle. All of her insides had been removed and her eyeballs had been gouged out. They were later found thrown in the river. Her genitals had also been cut off. In her little hand, she still clutched on tight to that halfpenny that Baker had given her, which is probably one of the saddest images that you could try and conjure up in your mind. Her injuries were nothing short of barbaric. As news got back to Fanny's mother, Harriet collapsed as she was attempting to run to go and get her husband George, who was playing cricket nearby. When George was finally informed about what had happened to his young daughter, he's said to have gone and got his shotgun from the house and wanted to go and shoot whoever had attacked his daughter, which, as a parent, even if you're not a parent, I think that's understandable that you would want to do that. George's neighbours, however, convinced him not to go, and they sat with him all night to make sure that he didn't do anything that would ultimately lead him in prison. The following day, hundreds of locals arrived at Flood Meadow to try and help to locate more of Fanny's missing remains. Parts of her little body were found scattered all over the field. Her intestines were not found until the day after that. The remains that had been found were taken to a local house known as Leithen Bottle, and here the pieces were essentially tried to be sewn back together. Fanny's body was then taken to the police station for further tests. Meanwhile, the police are trying to figure out who the hell has committed this horrendous crime, and their one and only suspect is the 29-year-old Frederick Baker. The police tracked Baker back to the solicitor's office where he worked, and at around 9 p.m, Baker was found there, still working, an hour later than what he was scheduled to be working. The fact that Baker was seen to be a respectable man, he had a good job for the time, he had a little bit of money, he was well dressed, would have made it very difficult for the police, because he automatically gets benefit of the doubt, if you like. Someone with money would automatically be treated better than somebody who didn't have money. And I have no doubt that had there been a second suspect who was poorer and maybe who lived near Tannhouse Lane, that Baker would have been disregarded as a suspect completely. But as there was no one else, the police had no choice but to arrest Baker, which is what they did. Baker protested his innocence, but his credibility was soon washed away. On closer inspection, police found small stains of blood on the cuffs of his shirt that he's folded over to try and hide. His trousers, obviously this is a couple of days on, his trousers had already been washed and cleaned. Surprisingly, Baker was very calm during his police interrogation, which is not really what you'd expect from somebody who's being accused of murdering an 8-year-old child, particularly if they're claiming that it's a false accusation. But the biggest blow to his proclamation of innocence was a diary that the police found at Baker's workplace. In Baker's handwriting in this diary, it read simply, Saturday, 24th August, 1867. Killed a young girl, full stop. It was fine and hot, full stop. Just reading that seems so callous and so cold, and it just seems like such a flippant remark to make. The police had been searching and searching for a murder weapon to no avail when a local brought in a stone that had been found up in Flood Meadow. This stone was covered in blood and still had lumps of flesh and human hair attached to it, and it's believed that that stone was used to kill Fanny. An eyewitness also came forward, a young boy who lived very, very close to the Adamses. Now, this young boy claimed that he had seen Baker come from the hop field with blood on his hands and on his clothing. He said he saw Baker walk to the river where he began to wash himself off. He used his handkerchief to dip into the river to begin to wipe all the blood from himself. He also witnessed Baker putting a small knife into his pocket, as well as a second unidentified object. Following an autopsy, it was found that Fanny had died from a very strong blow to the head, likely from the stone that had been found. After she had died, she had been brutally dismembered. Because she was already deceased at the time the dismemberment began, the blood wouldn't have come gushing out because obviously the heart wasn't pumping anymore. So it's unlikely that Baker would have been drenched in blood, though he still would have had blood on him. On the 27th of August 1867, an inquest was held into Fanny's death, which it was very commonplace to hold inquests immediately after a sudden death at that time. Both Minnie Warner and Harriet Adams were called to give evidence, and they both firmly pointed the finger at Baker. After listening to all the evidence, the inquest determined that Baker had been responsible for the death of Fanny Adams. Obviously, an inquest is not a criminal trial, and so immediately afterwards, Baker was sent to Winchester Jail before his criminal trial, which took place on the 5th of December 1867. During this trial, one of Baker's colleagues had testified that Baker had left the office at just after 1 p.m. on the day Fanny had been murdered. He returned to the office at around 3:25 p.m. He then left again and returned back to the office at around 5:30 p.m. And we know that it was during this second period of absence that he ran into Harriet and Mrs. Gardner. At around 6 p.m, Baker and this colleague left the solicitor's office and went across the road to the pub known as the Swan. Baker confided in his colleague that he had spoken with 2 women about the disappearance of a young girl. He'd also casually thrown in that he was thinking about leaving Alton and was planning to do so on the Monday. When his colleague mentioned that Baker would most likely struggle to find another job, Baker coldly remarked, "Well, I could always be a butcher." I mean, this guy was a piece of work. The defence tried to claim that the knife found on Baker was far too small to be able to dismember a body, and that it wasn't unusual for men of the time to carry small knives around with them. They also called Baker's own father to give a character reference. His father claimed that Baker was, quote, "a nervous and weakly child," end quote, and couldn't possibly carry out such a crime. Now, the weakest defence I think I've ever heard in my life was in regards to the diary entry. Remember the diary that they found at his workplace where he'd practically confessed? Well, Baker's defence team claimed that he had been drunk when he had written that diary entry, and that it wasn't a confession but merely an acknowledgement of a girl's death in the area, and because he was intoxicated, he had forgotten to put in the comma. So rather than saying "killed a young girl today," it should have read "killed, comma, a young girl today." It was fine and hot. I mean, come on now. Knowing that the defence was incredibly weak, they also tried to go down the route of claiming that Baker was insane. The reasons being that they believed insanity was hereditary at the time, and they could prove that his family had mental health issues, therefore that should be enough to suffice his claim of insanity. They claimed that Baker's father was an incredibly violent man himself, and that he although hadn't ever been convicted of killing anyone, was most certainly capable of doing so. They also claimed that his sister had died of brain fever, which was supposed to back up his claim of insanity. That he'd had a cousin who was committed to an asylum on at least 4 occasions, and that Baker himself had even attempted suicide after a love affair had ended. And though the judge gave the jury an opportunity to consider not guilty on the grounds of insanity, the jury deliberated for just 15 minutes and delivered the verdict that Frederick Baker was guilty of the willful murder of 8-year-old Fanny Adams. He was sentenced to hang. And at 8 a.m. on the 24th of December 1867, so a cold Christmas Eve morning, in front of a crowd of around 5,000 people, Frederick Baker was executed by hanging. Interestingly, his was the last public execution that took place at Winchester Jail. Fanny Adams was buried in Alton Cemetery, where her headstone still stands today, and it reads, "Sacred to the memory of Fanny Adams, aged 8 years and 4 months, who was cruelly murdered August 24th, 1867. Fear not them which kill the body, but rather fear him who is able to kill both body and soul in hell." So how do we get from this particularly gruesome horrendous murder of a young girl to the phrase Sweet Fanny Adams? Well, for that, we have to look into the somewhat macabre humour of the British Navy. A couple of years after the murder had taken place, the seamen were served up chopped mutton in tins. Now, this food was disgusting. It was inedible to a lot of people. And so a joke started within the Navy that the food was so bad that it was probably the chopped up remains of Sweet Fanny Adams. And so it caught on. A phrase was born to mean something of little value or something that is worthless. Over the years, Sweet Fanny Adams became shortened down to Sweet FA. FA is more nowadays used to mean Sweet F all, which means, nothing. It's, if someone's done Sweet FA, they've done absolutely nothing. It's so strange how these little phrases and terms come into English language. I don't know about you, but for me, I'll never be able to use that phrase or hear that phrase without thinking about that sweet little girl who lost her life. If you have enjoyed this video and you haven't already, please don't forget to subscribe. Leave any comments down below. Let me know what you think of this story. Let me know if there are any other phrases that have strange meanings behind them. And I will see you guys in the next video. Take care.
Baby, I'm home again.